Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the interview.
Today we are joined by one of the six senators from Tasmania, Richard Colbeck. Richard, thank you for joining us today. Actually, I think it's 12. Sorry.
12 senators from Tassie, yes. Each state has 12 senators, which some of the larger states complain about, but each state has 12 and the territories currently have 2.
Yes. So, Richard, thank you for joining us today. Just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you, could you give us a little brief description of yourself just before we get into the questions?
Okay, so I live in regional Australia. I was elected to the Parliament for the first time in 2001, started my term in 2002. I'd worked for 25 years in the construction industry prior to that, starting my career as an apprentice carpenter and working my way up through the industry and doing a range of things as a part of that. So family, 3 kids, 4 grandkids, couple of cats. So in most circumstances, typical resident living in regional Australia.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm surprised no dogs there involved in the family, just a couple of cats.
We've been through babysitting of dogs for our 2 boys, but because we're away a bit, it's difficult to manage dogs. Not that we don't like them; it's just that it's a lifestyle thing.
That is really, really true. That is true, especially for, not being at home as much. I guess a lot of regional MPs in Parliament don't get to spend as much time at home compared to metropolitan MPs. I think we spoke to the member for Parks, Mark Colton, a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how he was going on a week trip from the top of his electorate all the way to the bottom of his electorate. So they were right after the interview. So it was a real challenge for a lot of regional MPs to spend a lot of time at home, seeing as how sparsely populated and how big their electorates are and how much time they have to spend in Canberra.
So, typically we spend 20 weeks a year in Canberra for parliamentary sittings, but I would go somewhere every week other than that, and it could be anywhere in the country for committee work largely, but also travelling all over the state. So as a senator, I represent the entire state. I was in Hobart last night, drove back home, arrived about 12:30 this morning, and then back into things again today. And so you're out most nights, you're doing stuff during the day, but you're also travelling around the country to do committee work. And that is one of the lifestyle things that we have to learn to manage.
Exactly. That's at the end of the day, that's the job. So it's part of the job
Correct.
description. So you can't really
That's
choose where you're going and what you're doing each week. It's up for interpretation and, it can always change, especially. And I guess that's one of the great things about being a politician at the end of the day. You don't know what's coming next. So it's unpredictable.
You also get to see some pretty amazing parts of this country that we live in. And so, in recent weeks, I've been in far northwest, Western Australia, obviously in around Canberra, but travelling around Tassie as well. An inquiry that we'll report on tomorrow has taken us to every state and regions within the states. So, it does provide you the opportunity to see some amazing parts of this country.
Really, really does. So I think we'll get straight back into our questions, Richard. So my first question to you is, how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
I don't have a university life. I'm not university educated. I'm a tradie. So when I left high school at the end of year 12, or matric as we called it in Tassie in those days, and then went and did a trade. I regret to say I was probably too busy having a good time during high school. I did okay, and I passed, but I'm not sure that I applied myself as I could have done. So high school in Hobart and here on the Northwest Coast, then into a trade as an apprentice carpenter joiner. I really enjoyed that. I flourished in that role. I did exceptionally well as an apprentice, and that then led me to senior and management roles within the building industry over the 25 years that I worked there, which taught me a lot. And the things that I learned are still tools that I use today. So that practical experience, I think, was really good for me.
And during your high school life, did you always consider yourself to become a tradie at end of year 12, or was that more just of circumstance, or did you actually think about having a university and career after high school?
I looked at university, but an opportunity came up for me. I'd worked with wood for a long time. As a young person, I bought a wood lathe when I was a teenager with the proceeds from a previous job, paper run. And so in my later high school years, I was wood turning a lot. I was earning my own money. I was buying my own clothes, all that sort of stuff. And so it was something I was familiar with. I was pretty okay at. And so the opportunity for an apprenticeship came up and I grabbed it.
Exactly. And, those sort of apprenticeships still exist to today. So for a lot of young people out there, if you're
we're looking to build 1.2 million houses over the next 5 years.
That's true.
We need carpenters and joiners.
Exactly. And I think there is still a little bit of stigma towards that sort of tradie sort of background, especially in high school, around a lot of kids trying to do that sort of thing. There's a lot of stigma around, more, I guess, people say that, there's a lot of push towards going to university, and it's kind of still looked down a little bit to become a carpenter, become a plumber, become an electrician. So I think that sort of stigma really does need to change, because as you said, we are planning to build 2 million houses in 5 years. So we really do need a lot of carpenters, especially.
Well, look, the trades are all important. They make a significant contribution. I've had a very good career in politics post being a carpenter, and there's a couple of others in the building that have come out of the trades as well. And I think that breadth of experience is something that our political system and having that breadth of experience within it is extremely valuable and important when it comes down to dealing with some of the practical issues that we have to deal with and managing those and understanding what a practical solution is versus a theoretical one that might come through some university research, for example. Now, those things provide us with an enormous amount of really valuable information. But sometimes practical skills on how things will work, how business works, and what will happen when the decisions we make flow into the broader community, having that breadth of understanding, I think, is important in our body politic.
That really is true, because, this it's important to have theoretical and, academic experience, but that sort of hands-on experience within the communities is so important, especially in politics, because at the end of the day, all your decisions that you make reflect back onto the people that you represent. So it's all really about having that hands-on experience and understanding that the decision that you make currently in Parliament and how it will affect the people back home.
Yep. Look, that's right. And so I'm one who's very encouraging of people going down the trade path. You could end up anywhere. Some of the most successful business people here in Tasmania have come through trades like I did, others successfully through university. So I wouldn't be stressing too much about the path. Take the path that you think is the best for you. And the concept of lifelong learning is one that's much more accepted than it may have been in the past. It's really important, an important one, but it can take you anywhere.
Exactly. And as you said, life is just one big book, and, it's you learning constantly. So, don't be too hard up on yourself if you don't know exactly what you're going to be doing, in the next year or whatever, in terms of, whether going to university or high school, especially for our listeners out there. Take every step as it is, and, at the end of the day, you'll constantly learn throughout your whole life. So I guess don't put too much pressure on deciding what you want to do in the immediate future.
Make a step. You don't know where it'll lead you.
Exactly, exactly. We'll move on to our next question, Senator. So prior to Parliament, you worked in the construction industry for over 20 years, as you stated previously, starting your career off as a carpenter and eventually becoming a managing director and proprietor for a building consultancy. Are you able to talk a little bit about this career in the building industry? And what are some of your most memorable builds? And also, what skills did you develop in this line of work that you've used in your own political career?
Yeah, look, we had a really interesting time in building. I worked all over the northwest and west coast of Tasmania on the two Bass Strait Islands. I supervised the construction of power stations on Flinders Island and King Island. I worked on a hospital on the west coast, a number of buildings in the region, from cottages right through to light commercial construction. So that taught me a whole range of practical skills and planning and project management skills, all of which remain relevant today. I also learnt to write quality assurance, and that's had an impact and been a very valuable skill for me in a range of things, not just in building, but the principles of quality assurance apply through a range of things that I've done in my time in politics, working with the food processing and the food quality and safety industries when I was in the health portfolio, and the quality assurance work when I was in the aged care portfolio, because quality of care and the principles that sit around a quality system can be applied to any sector. So all of those sorts of things became or remain valuable to me, because the principles that sit behind them don't change, and you can apply them to the work that you're doing in any circumstance. So those things that I learned during that period in my time in the building industry were very valuable, and the lessons that you can learn from them as well. I can recall on one major project where we were doing some initial quality work. It saved us an enormous amount of time and money, because we found the mistakes before they were standing up in the air on the frame of a building. We could fix them before we erected the steelwork. That saved everyone a significant amount of money. So that the checking processes that you go through to make sure that you get things right along the way, very sound lessons learnt.
Exactly, exactly. And as you said, those sort of skills really, really do relate towards your portfolios that you had previously in health and aged care, because at the end of the day, especially in aged care, a lot of retirees and people in aged care really deserve a quality sort of experience and quality healthcare in towards the end of their life. So it really is important that you have that quality assurance background. In your case, Richard, that you were able to help out and give your expertise in that sort of industry.
Well, it was a matter of looking how systems might be applied to the reform of the sector to ensure that people got that quality of care, and what were the things that drove that. Now, I didn't need to necessarily know the exact principles and the details of those things, but it was the principles that sat behind it and how a system might work that was valuable for me. And so I continue to use those tools, and those things were very, very valuable learnings for me through a very different form of work, but the principles that underpin them remain the same and applicable in a whole range of things. So, I've considered myself very fortunate in that sense, that I had that very practical experience at the outset.
That is very, very true. Yeah. We'll move on to our next question. So, in addition to your building career, as you previously stated, you were the director of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Tasmania from 1998 to 2001. Are you able to describe to us what you undertook in this role, and how important are businesses in the Tasmanian economy?
Well, businesses are important in any economy, and strong businesses that can create employment, be profitable, the taxation that those businesses pay for all the services that we consume and are important to us, and we've already discussed. So a strong, vibrant business community is exceptionally important. And when you come back to sort of core principles about the role that we undertake as elected representatives, so often it comes back to, in fact, in all circumstances, it comes back to having a good economy that's well structured, well managed, and is providing employment for people within the community. So, being able to hear and represent the values, the things that are important, understand what's happening in the commercial world and why, and then how you might apply that to policy is important. So having the experience both at a local level with the Devonport Chamber of Commerce, which was how I made the stepping stone to the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and hearing those local concerns, how they might be applied perhaps locally, also at a state and a national level, and where those problems are appropriately managed, or where the legislation that impacts those problems is sits. So whether it's a local matter with planning through local government, whether it's some of the state issues, or corporations law, which is obviously managed at a Commonwealth level. So understanding and seeing all of those things, having the opportunity to be a voice for business in representing to our elected representatives, which was part of the work that we did as representatives on the Chamber of Commerce, and then being on the other side of the equation and receiving those representations. So it was, I suppose for me, part of a learning curve, part of the experience that I developed over time, and understanding then the role of a lot of these organisations in our broader community and how they can play their part at the various levels that they do.
Yeah, exactly. Because at the end of the day, as you said, businesses are so integral in any sort of economy. So the role they play, via paying taxes, you previously stated, and providing employment towards people within local communities is imperative, and it's so important. So understanding their role in the economy, as you said, through being the director of Chamber of Commerce and being able to therefore provide information towards the politicians at that time between 1998 and 2001 was imperative to represent those businesses. And then, as you stated as well, it was quite interesting that the roles were reversed at the end when you became a senator, because then you were receiving the information from the Chamber of Commerce. So I guess you've been pretty lucky there, where you've been able to be on both sides of the fence in terms of receiving the information from the Chamber of Commerce and providing it to the politicians at the time.
Yeah, that's right, and it's a good way to be connected with your local community. I was a function earlier in the week with the president of the Devonport Chamber of Commerce, an organisation I was president of prior to coming into politics. Again, talking about local issues and things that were impacting the local business community. So the connections remain important.
Yeah, they're extremely important. As you said, those communities are the ones you represent now as a senator. So you're still listening towards their concerns and the issues that they have, whether that be probably crime in around those regional towns, maybe even the stadium in Hobart. I know that's a very big issue in Tasmania. So listening towards their sort of concerns in the community is imperative as a representative. And, it's quite similar to, as you said, being the director of Chamber of Commerce, because you still got to listen to, businesses and what their view is on the current state of the economy.
Yeah, look, there's some fairly, as you say, some fairly significant developments occurring in the state. The stadium being one, but for example, here in my hometown of Devonport, there's a huge redevelopment of the port going on. Transport in and out of Tasmania is one of the major economic indicators. Cost of freight, frequency and availability of space on the ships backwards and forwards to mainland Australia, really critical to our economy. So understanding and having the contacts to be able to receive that information is a really important part of what we do.
It really, really is, yes. I think we'll move on to our next question, Richard. So, Richard, you've served in Parliament for over 20 years, and I don't want to make you take this the wrong way, but you were elected in 2002, that being 4 years before I was born. So, from your time in Parliament, what would you say is the most memorable bill or legislation that you helped pass? And do you have any regrets in your political career?
I'm not a big one for regrets at all. There's probably some things you might do a little bit differently, or and everybody makes mistakes.
Exactly.
And so we've all got those. My perspective on that is, yes, well, we all make mistakes. The question is how you get up again, and how you manage that and move on. And It was the same when I was in the building trade. Everyone's going to make a mistake. How you fixed it was the measure of how you were as a carpenter or a tradie. So, um, regrets perhaps a few, but I don't tend to dwell on those. I mean, and there were some pretty important things that have occurred during my time in Parliament, and possibly the most difficult one was the decision in 2003 when we went into Iraq, for Australia to go to war, and for me as an elected representative to be part of sending our troops to a war. That's a pretty big deal, and I found that something that I struggled with as part of that process. It was a very difficult decision. There were some conscience votes in the period between 2004 and 2007, and they were pretty important votes, particularly some of the ones that were around research on stem cell research and human cloning. Those pieces of legislation were very hotly contested, and were driven by some significant moral issues, as some people saw it. And they passed by only a couple of votes. And if you look at some of the medical applications today, 20 years later, that are coming from the utilisation of stem cell research, which was not permitted until that research passed. So many of our medical applications now are coming as a result of that. So I think that was a really important debate. It was a very controversial and topical one at the time. And it was a conscience vote too. So it wasn't done along party lines. And probably in terms of a reform process, one of the most important pieces of work that I did was the response that I led to the Aged Care Royal Commission in 2001. That was a very, very difficult time, because if you would remember very much that we had COVID while the Royal Commission was on, and that was added an extra layer of complexity and stress to it. It was probably the most difficult period in my working career. But if you look at the response to the Royal Commission that we tabled in May of 2021, after the report was handed down at the end of March or into February in 2021, it was a very, very significant document. And it is still the current document for the reform of the aged care sector. So that piece of work has endured a change of government and is still the document that is being used to inform the reform of the aged care sector. So that was a really significant piece of work. A couple of lighter things. I was part of the bid team for the 2032 Olympics and Paralympic Games coming to Australia. So, it made Australia one of only 2 or 3 countries in the world that will host the Olympic Games and the Paralympics 3 times, or the Olympic Games 3 times. That was pretty cool. And also being involved in the bid process for the 2023 Women's Football World Cup, which was a fantastic event. And Matildas were such a huge feature of that. It elevated women's football and women's sport in this country in a way that I don't think any other event could have done. And so really progressed that. So, look, there's a whole range of things that I've had the opportunity to be involved with and do. I did a lot of work in fishing and forestry, provided a reform process for the implementation of marine parks around this country, which gives us the largest set of marine parks of any country in the world. So we're really well served in that sense. And so there's a whole range of things that I can look back on that I've been involved with over that period of time. And again, an inquiry that I've been part of over the last 12 months, banking in regional Australia, which is just so important to our local and regional communities. So still more that's underway.
Exactly. And as you said, being in Parliament for such a long period of time, you've been able to, be around with different bills and different sort of legislation, as you said, with the Iraq War, with a lot of stem cell research in 2004, 2007, around your early time in Parliament to, being involved in the Aged Care Royal Commission. There's a lot of different sort of roles and different sort of things you were involved in your parliamentary career. And that's not, that's to say, at the end of the day, politicians really have to be, a jack of all trades and really try and get involved in different sorts of issues and offer their opinions and expertise because, you can't be focused on one specific thing your whole entire political career because, things change. And as you said, stuff that you were debating probably 20 years ago might not be relevant towards the stuff we're debating now. So politics is an overall changing game. And at the end of the day, it's about trying to be as involved as possible in as many things as you can.
Well, sometimes you end up in places that you don't expect. And
exactly.
You don't necessarily control that. And you do crash courses in things that you didn't necessarily understand or have as complete a knowledge as you do when you work your way through that process. But the core skills and those core principles and values, I think, still work through. So a lot of the things that I learnt working practically in the building trade, as I said earlier, have continued to follow me through, and those principles and values remain important. And one of the things that I've always tried to do is be consistent in the things that I say and do, because that's, I suppose, pretty much who I am. But that consistency over time is also important, but also the corporate memory that gets built up too. I mean, I've had some conversations with some much younger members of Parliament, good friends, and I'm reflecting on something that happened early in my career, and it's a bit like the conversation I had with you at the outset. They were still in primary school when those things occurred, and so their political memory of that isn't the same as mine. But the breadth of those skills and knowledge and views and perspectives is what's important about our parliamentary process, because it's bringing all of those things together that provides for the decision-making process and the listening to and taking into account all those views is, I think, really important. It's the value of a political party system, because it's not one person making a decision individually on their own. When our party comes together to make a decision, quite often I've been in the party room and my view has been nuanced by the conversation that I've had, the debate that's been had with my colleagues in the party room, because I can see their perspective. And then having had that expressed, I then take that into account in my thinking as well. And it's a really important part of that process.
It really, really is at the end of the day, because, as you were saying just before, a lot of the stuff that you were debating in the early 2000s, some of the parliamentarians now were just in primary school or, still in school at that time. So that their sort of political memory is probably not as big as yours. So at the end of the day, we all have different perspectives on things, and we all come into politics at different sorts of times. So I guess that wealth of experience is really, really important, for teaching the newer generations about what happened in the past and how we can, not repeat the same mistakes as we did before, and how we can, try and learn from the past and be better in the future.
As some of the more senior members did when I first arrived. So
yeah, that is really, really, it really, really is important. So yeah, we'll move on to our next question, Richard. So a little bit of a lighter note question here. So who would you say is your political role model or idol?
Yeah, look, I'm not so much one for idols as such. I don't necessarily put people up on a pedestal in that sense. I look at people, what they do, how they act. And so, there's a number of people who've shone through, exceeded, leaders like Churchill, for example, who went through some terrible times and endured. I know John Howard pretty well, and respect him, and Bob Hawke. And those guys, that Hawke, Keating, Howard, Costello area were really important for our country in putting in place some reforms that set us up for 30 years. And they were prepared to work together and cooperate to a certain extent, and something that I don't necessarily see completely in our body politic today in the same way that it happened back then. It's, I mean, it's always contested. It's always a fair battle. But somebody who I do go back to, and I'll just quickly go through, and you'll get a sense of my thought. This is a guy who, when he was 23, went into debt to become partner in the store. When he was 26, his business partner died and he had to pay off all the debts. At 28, he'd been courting a girl for 4 years, and he asked her to marry him. She said no. He tried his hand in politics twice, failed. He was elected to the Congress at his third attempt, but lost his seat 2 years later. He lost his son at 41. At 45, he ran for the American Senate and lost. At 47, he failed as a vice presidential candidate. At 49, he ran for the Senate again and lost. And at 51, he was elected president of the United States. Now, that's a pretty, he stuck at it, this guy. He really did stick at it. That's Abraham Lincoln, who's regarded as the greatest president the US has ever had. So I suppose the headline on that story is luck or stickability. So perseverance to a task or to an objective is something that I admire in him, and I've read some of the books about him and some of his readings, the story of his Gettysburg Address, for example, all those sorts of things. So that gives a bit of a sense of the perseverance to a task once it's set, I think, is, but also the principles that he operated on too. I mean, he was a pretty extraordinary individual.
Yeah, extremely extraordinary individual, and someone that I guess, that is lost in today's sort of politics, someone who really represented the people, someone who was really willing to make a lot of changes towards and to better offer our society at that point in time, Abraham Lincoln. So, he's that sort of, it's really hard stuff, really, really hard stuff. And, sadly, you don't really see that as much in politics anymore. But, hopefully with time changing, we could maybe see something or someone similar to him into the future, for sure. We'll now move on to our next question, Richard. So I'll probably merge the two last questions here, just seeing as, we are very limited for time. So what made you run in the 2002 federal election for the Liberal Party, and what made you join the Liberal Party? In addition to that, what's some advice you'd give to students currently in 2024, especially those in university and high school?
Yeah, okay. Look, I was never someone who was looking to politics. I found myself in a number of representative roles as I worked through my career. I became the company representative to the local Master Builders Association branch when I was working for the business. I was invited to a meeting of the Parents and Friends Association because they had a problem that related to buildings, so I ended up involved in that and ended up president. And I sort of found myself gravitating to organisations that were doing things. Chamber of Commerce was another one. And I was not necessarily looking for a representative role, but I found myself as president of the Parents and Friends, president of the Chamber of Commerce, and a range of other things. And I was invited by a friend of mine who was also involved in the chamber to a political party meeting. I wasn't sure what it was I was getting into. I found myself with a job, and then I progressed through the party organisation as well, with branch roles, electorate roles. I ended up as state president of the party division in Tassie, even though I promised my wife I'd never do it. And as I was doing more of these representative roles, it sort of dawned on me that perhaps a representative job was something that I might like to do. And so I started making applications to the party process to stand in the Senate. So that took some time. So the perseverance thing came in. My first attempt to get into the Senate was in 1994. I stood a couple of times, wasn't successful at all. I got on the ticket in 1998 and ended up running it for the federal seat of Lyons in 98, and that wasn't successful either. And I was successful on the ticket at number 3 in 2001 election. So it was a process of growing into that sort of job, but also persevering once I'd set a target on that's what I wanted to do.
And that's extremely important, that sort of perseverance and that sort of willingness to continue trying, even if you don't succeed at the immediate start. Continuing and pushing forward is really, really important. And maybe that does relate to some of the advice you'd give to students in 2024, as I was saying, connected to our last question there. That sort of perseverance and that sort of drive is really, really important to continuing to look for a better life and to work hard and towards the future.
Well, look, representative job that I do is a great job. I love what I do. That's why I'm still doing. Still believe I've got things to offer. And so, that's really important, the passion for what it is you do. I think that it's a really important role, and you can be involved at a local level, in local government, state, Commonwealth, as we are. I've had the opportunity to represent Australia at an international level, whether it be through the bid for the Olympic. I was Australia's delegate at the G20 Ag Ministers meeting in Turkey in 2015. So all of those things, it's an important role. And so if someone's interested, become engaged. There are multiple pathways in, as we're seeing these days. I chose a party system. I'm very, very comfortable with that process, understanding how that system works, and then how it might support you in becoming an elected member. It will take time, and I think that's an important thing to understand as well. And you're not necessarily going to be successful at your first attempt. In fact, the likelihood is that you won't. So again, as you've indicated, and I've talked about, that perseverance is important. But the other thing I would say is that sometimes an opportunity comes along, it's worth having a look at and stepping through the door and seeing what becomes of it. So take opportunities as they arise would be a piece of advice that I'd give to people. And at the outset, as we talked about before, make a start somewhere. It might not be where you want to end up being, but you don't know where it'll take you.
Exactly. And I was just going to say, we are running a bit of time on the meeting room, so I believe those are all our questions for you, Richard. So I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and speaking to us and talking a little bit about your career before politics and some advice you'd give to students out there to continue to persevere and to work hard. So we do really appreciate you coming on and speaking to us and taking the time out of your day.